In the year 1777, the stage for our tale unfurls in the heart of Georgia, steeped in the frenetic struggle of the American Revolutionary War. A remote tavern, notably known for its rustic charm and hearty fare, became the backdrop for a mysterious saga that continues to be whispered about even today. It was here, amidst flickering candlelight and the raucous laughter of soldiers, that a series of unsettling events unfolded, events that would forever be etched into the annals of local lore. The Tavern of the Old Quarter, as it was called, stood as a haven for weary officers and travelers seeking refuge from the toll of conflict. Wood beams creaked under the weight of history as the scent of roast game wafted through the air, mingling with the robust aroma of ale that flowed freely. The tavern was bustling on that fateful evening. Officers from various regiments, weary from the day's battles, found solace in the modest establishment. Among them were Captain John Monroe and Lieutenant Thomas Reed, esteemed officers known for their bravery and camaraderie. They were celebrated figures amidst the turmoil of war, yet as we'll soon discover, fame does not always shield one from the storm that lurks in shadows. As the night deepened, the tavern hummed with conversation. Strangers, cloaked in traveling garb, entered and approached the officers. Their dark attire stood in stark contrast to the vibrant uniforms on display. With charming smiles and warm words, they invited Captain Monroe and Lieutenant Reed to join them for drinks. "I'll have a pint of your finest ale if that's not too much trouble," Monroe laughed, his voice carrying warmth that matched the lively cheer of the evening. But beneath that warmth, a subtle air of intrigue began to weave itself into the fabric of the gathering. Locals at the bar exchanged glances, a flicker of concern dancing in their eyes as the officers settled in with these enigmatic newcomers. Tom Weston, a recurring patron of the tavern, later shared his account of the evening. "I remember sitting there watching them laugh and drink. The strangers claimed they were traveling soldiers, but something in their eyes felt off. Men like Monroe and Reed didn't usually disappear into the night without drawing notice." As the hours ticked on, laughter and merriment enveloped the tavern. But as the clock struck midnight, an eerie silence encroached upon the scene. The normally boisterous energy dimmed like the fading embers of a fire, and with that silence came a gnawing sense of unease. The other officers, ever watchful and protective, noticed that Monroe and Reed had not returned from their revelry with the strangers. Whispers of unease spread through the crowded tavern, but the locals were reluctant to voice their suspicions aloud. No one wished to make a fuss over what could simply be an evening of fun. Days turned into weeks, yet the officers failed to reappear. Worry gnawed at the hearts of the men who served alongside them. Captain Monroe's absence lingered like a shadow, a threat hidden behind the facade of camaraderie. Lieutenant Reed had been known for his friendship with Monroe. They were frequently seen together, often sharing tales of bravery and loss over jugs of ale. They were inseparable until that fateful night at the tavern when they let their guard down, perhaps too far. In the war-torn landscape of Georgia, the truth began to fray, leading the remaining officers down a precarious path. Determined to uncover the truth, Colonel Samuel Brant, a respected officer in the Army, decided it was time to take action. Accessible records spoke of missing officers, but they weren't conclusive. "That night I could sense the veil of secrecy cloaking the tavern," Brant recalled in a solemn tone. "Something was inherently wrong, and it was my duty to find out what happened to my men." Returning to the Tavern of the Old Quarter, Colonel Brant sought answers. He engaged in conversations with the tavern owner, an older man named Tobias. The tavern owner's eyes darted nervously, the weight of the past lingering like smoke in the air. "They came in, drank like the rest, and laughed with everyone, but I never saw them leave," he stammered, his voice a mix of fear and guilt. The colonel pressed on, a steely resolve coursing through his veins. When he gathered the other patrons, the chatter of concern filled the air. One rescinded on his previous lack of action. "We've heard of others, men who vanished in the night. Only now do we realize what we dismissed, what our ignorance masked." With growing determination, word traveled swiftly along the delicate strands of rumor. Terrified whispers of disappearances became louder. Could the tavern be harboring a dark secret, possibly a network of deception weaving through the realms of military and civilian life? The community was engulfed in fear and confusion. The tavern was no longer a sanctuary, it had become a brewing storm in the night where safety met shadows. Those who had once found comfort within its walls now stood paralyzed by doubt, unwilling or unable to act decisively. Brant and his fellow officers established a perimeter around the tavern. They strategized to observe it discreetly, determined to unmask whatever evil phenomenon might be lurking within. Hours turned to days once more, each tick of the clock amplifying their anxiety, but their patience was about to yield a startling revelation. It was one moonlit night when moonlight spilled over the tavern like a chilling promise that they witnessed a solitary figure slipping inside. They recognized him immediately. It was one of the men who had mingled with Monroe and Reed. The tension cracked like a brittle twig beneath their feet as they prepared to storm the tavern. Upon entering, their hearts raced as they searched the dimly lit rooms. Every corner harbored shadows, and every shadow felt alive. The sounds of clinking glasses and jovial laughter echoed through the tavern, but the joyous ambience belied the truth or what it withheld. A hidden door behind the bar creaked open, revealing winding stairs descending into the darkness. Brant exchanged determined glances with his men, silently agreeing to follow. They descended into the depths of the tavern where the musty air felt thick with secrets. As they continued down the staircase, the oppressive silence grew, but suddenly their ears caught the faintest whispers as if secrets were being bartered for something sinister. They arrived at a dimly lit chamber where a council of men sat, somewhat imposing in their demeanor. Their faces were partially obscured through the haze. "Welcome," one of the strangers greeted with mock formality. "We've been waiting for you." Before Brant could respond, he saw images of Monroe and Reed hanging on the walls, the officers' faces lined with fear. Suddenly it dawned on him, these men were more than mere travelers. They were mercenaries, gathering information, luring officers with ale and promises. The tavern was a trap, a den where secrets of war were traded for those entangled in conflict. Rage surged within Brant as realization struck he had walked into the heart of treachery. "What have you done?" he demanded, but his voice was swallowed by the atmosphere, thick and heavy. From the murky shadows, the laughter faded into a tense stillness. Just then, orders rang through the air, and Brant and his officers found themselves ambushed, cornered by unfamiliar faces. The mercenaries had seized control, leaving the officers vulnerable to their twisted whims. In the ensuing chaos, cries echoed through the tavern, mingling with clinking tankards and turmoil. Officers fought valiantly, reclaiming their strength as the tavern erupted in a frenzy of conflict. It became a battleground, not just for their lives but for the honor of their fallen brothers. Yet in that pivotal moment, dread merged with hope as revenge washed over the treachery that had unfolded. As dawn broke, the sun bathed the tavern in crimson hues, revealing the aftermath of the conflict. Brant and his remaining men stood amidst the wreckage. The mercenaries had fled, leaving behind a desolate reminder of the night's war. Colonel Brant vowed to uncover the truth of the tavern's shadowy past, to seek justice for his fellow officers and the countless unnamed victims swallowed by selfish pursuits. The Tavern of the Old Quarter stood as a testimony, a monument to struggles that defied mere battles and that of trust violated in darkness. In the months and years that followed, the tale of that fateful night became woven into the lore of Georgia. It served as a cautionary reminder for every officer who came after. For while the tavern eventually returned to its role as a gathering place for weary travelers, whispers of what had transpired lingered like ghosts amidst the laughter, a reminder of the night when strangers offered chemistry where danger thrived. And above all, it reinforced a lesson that transcended conflicts past and present, that appearances might deceive and safety can wear a friendly face. The Tavern of the Old Quarter was double-faceted. It was both a sanctuary and a harbinger of secrets lurking in the shadows, a stark reminder of bravery and darkness intertwined in the strands of fate. With the dawn of a new day casting its light upon the ruins of the tavern, Colonel Brant and his remaining men began to piece together the aftermath. The once inviting warmth of the Old Quarter now held an ominous weight, a funeral shroud draped over what had been a gathering place for soldiers and townsfolk alike. As they gained their composure, there was an unspoken understanding among the officers. They needed to act quickly, to inform their superiors about what had transpired and to ensure that justice was served for their missing comrades. "We cannot allow this to slip away unnoticed," Brant asserted, resolute as he surveyed the wreckage. "We must pursue those men, expose their operations, and bring them to justice." With a plan brewing in their minds, the officers set out to rally the local militia and combine their forces. Word of the ambush at the tavern spread quickly through the countryside. Distrust began to take root in neighboring communities as tales of the mercenary ambush circulated. No longer could the taverns be welcomed with open arms. These establishments were now suspect, gardens from which treachery bloomed. "I can't believe they'd hide in plain sight," one local farmer grumbled as he joined the ranks of the militia. "They should know that we'll protect our own." As the townsfolk rallied under the banner of justice, anger surged anew, brushing aside the shadows of despair left by the fallen officers. The resolve was palpable, and as the coalition readied themselves, Colonel Brant shared every detail of their encounter in the underground chamber. "We must understand their networks, their dealings," he implored. "There is more at stake than just revenge for Monroe and Reed. We're unraveling webs that could ensnare more soldiers." Armed with information and determination, the newly formed militia embarked on a hunt, consolidating resources and piecing together fragments of the mercenaries' movements. Colonel Brant utilized the skills of scouts and informants who knew the terrain intimately. They scoured the landscape, combing through nearby counties, approaching every tavern and inn with caution, hoping to catch whispers of their quarry. Days blended into nights as the search stretched, but each failure only served as fuel for their fervor. Their investigation led them to a secluded encampment a few leagues away, hidden in the woods where fallen leaves muffled approach. Tension hung heavy in the air as they prepared to confront their adversaries. On the eve of a new moon, when darkness reigned supreme, the officers crept silently into the clearing where the mercenaries made camp. Torches flickered in the distance, illuminating faces filled with wicked intent. Colonel Brant signaled for silence. This was not merely about retrieving their missing comrades' belongings, it was a battle of righteousness against treachery. They sprang into action, fierce and relentless, disrupting the smugness of the mercenaries who believed themselves shielded by their shadows. The night erupted into chaos as steel clashed against steel, and the air filled with the shouts of battle. Colonel Brant fought valiantly, remembering the haunting stories of Monroe and Reed, a fire igniting a new resolve within him. "Remember our brothers," he yelled as he engaged in hand-to-hand combat, the weight of duty giving him strength. The militia surged forward like an unrelenting tide, and in that moment they embodied both justice and vengeance. The mercenaries, caught off guard, faltered in the face of the righteous fury unleashed upon them. One by one, their ranks began to crumble. Brant's eyes pierced through the fray, searching for the face that would signify the culmination of their struggles, the leader behind this network of deceit. Finally, with the last remnants of the mercenaries' resistance crumbling around him, Brant spotted him, the man who had so brazenly mocked them in the tavern's hidden chamber. He recognized the dim glow of that familiar cloak which rippled like shadows under the moonlight. With calculated focus, Brant lunged, confronting the figure that had infiltrated their world with chaos and fear. "It's time to pay for what you've done," he growled, his voice unwavering as he closed the distance between them. "I was merely a facilitator for a greater cause," the man retorted defiantly, his demeanor unyielding even in the face of defeat. "Order and chaos are but sides of the same coin. You can't eradicate me. I am but a shadow, a piece of a larger game." But as Brant pressed harder, the weight of justice settled upon him like armor. "You'll not see another dawn with that kind of thought," he declared as he overpowered the mercenary, bringing him to his knees. In the aftermath of this battle, the militia stood as guardians, their breath clouded in the cool night air as they captured their enemies and ensured the mercenaries would no longer haunt their towns. Back in town, word of the skirmish spread like wildfire. The townsfolk welcomed the officers, nearly celebrating their triumph as they emerged from the woods. Yet in their victory there lingered a sense of sadness, a mourning stitched into the fabric of their triumph. Those missing officers were still unaccounted for, and peace had come at a steep price. Days turned into weeks again, and Colonel Brant remained resolute to find justice for his comrades. He retraced steps to the Tavern of the Old Quarter, now a hollow shell with broken stools and scattered tankards. As he approached it, he could feel the weight of lost lives still echoing within those walls. Determined, Brant began uncovering records and testimony, reaching out to soldiers who may have seen the missing officers after that fateful night. Each fragment of information brought him closer to the tangled web of connections that kept Monroe and Reed trapped, perhaps even traded like currency among enemies. One small discovery became pivotal. A fortuitous encounter with an old merchant traveling through the town led Brant to realize that the mercenaries, in their desperation and greed, had sold the officers to a faction they believed could challenge the Continental Army. The faded ink on dusty papers began to connect dots and outlined a clandestine operation that operated under the very noses of their leaders. "Your officers," the merchant intoned gravely, "were valuable assets worth far more than mere lives. They were coveted for their strategic insights and training. Our fight is larger than this tavern. They were meant to be instruments in someone's malicious designs. With renewed vigor, Brant mobilized his resources. Time was of the essence. Each hour that ticked away was one that could strip Monroe and Reed of their very essence. The remnants of the militia coalesced once more, and a broader coalition now took to the streets, marching with purpose to reclaim their own. Gathering allies from various regiments, they devised a plan that would lead them to a shadowy underbelly where prisoners were held. Each soldier bore the weight of their comrades' plight, moving with a silent promise to unearth the truth or reclaim those they'd lost to the void. Through a series of carefully crafted intelligence reports, they pinpointed a location from which rumors of captivity emanated, a fortress rumored to be a clandestine outpost feeding a growing network of treachery. As they prepared to infiltrate the fortress, Brant held his men at attention. "We move as one, you all carry the legacy of our lost brothers. Together we reclaim what has been ensnared, together we restore honor." The night fell heavy, cloaking their approach in darkness. Each step resonated with a collective heartbeat, a drive to breach the walls that encapsulated their missing officers. The air crackled with apprehension, yet the hope that surged within made them unyielding. Within those cold stone walls, their resolve would soon become a crucible that tested the limits of loyalty and bravery. What they would discover inside the stronghold would shake them to their core, revealing the depths of betrayal and igniting the flame of vengeance in their hearts. The battle for justice had begun anew, and the memory of Monroe and Reed would guide them towards liberation, for wherever shadows conspired, light could still break through. Together they would fight for the truth, unearthing hidden horrors that still haunted the taverns, towns, and soldiers alike. The search was far from over, the tides were shifting, and the dawning of a reckoning loomed on the horizon. As the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the clandestine operation at hand, Colonel Brant and his men stealthily approached the fortress. Their hearts beat as one, driven by an unwavering determination to free their comrades. Each step felt like a pledge, a solemn vow to reclaim the lost. They reached the fortress gate, a massive structure weathered by time and thick with secrets. Brant gestured silently to his men, signaling them to take positions. He had studied the layout, understanding that the very walls around them had likely witnessed unspeakable acts. The element of surprise was their greatest advantage. With a deep breath, Brant kicked open the heavy door, the sound echoing ominously through the courtyard. Inside, dim torches flickered, barely illuminating faces that danced between shadows. The guards inside, caught off guard at their sudden intrusion, rushed to their posts but were met with ferocity. The clash of swords rang out, a clarion call of war awakening the fortress from its slumber. Brant led the charge, rallying his men with urgency. They fought tooth and nail, navigating through the narrow halls where the very air was thick with treachery. In the midst of the chaotic brilliance of battle, Brant felt an unbreakable bond with his comrades. "We reclaim them," he shouted, cutting through the din. His voice resonated, a siren song of hope cutting through desperation. As they progressed deeper into the fortress, they encountered pockets of resistance, mercenaries who had held their ground, fiercely defending the captives they had ensnared. It was in these harried encounters that Brant's men found their strength, the glimmer of their missing comrades at the forefront of their minds, the anguish of loss igniting their fury. In the heart of the fortress, Brant and a handful of officers stumbled upon a door marked ominously with symbols of oppression, where the silence was nearly deafening. With a nod, they prepared to breach it together, compelled by a grim necessity. Brant rammed his shoulder into the door, splintering it open. Inside, darkness enveloped them like a shroud. Flickering light revealed a horrific sight. Cells lined the walls, each containing a handful of men, worn and weathered, their faces a parade of despair and confusion. Among them, in a corner cell, Brant immediately recognized the weary visage of Captain Monroe and the gaunt figure of Lieutenant Reed. "It's them," one of the officers exclaimed, his voice rising above the shadows. "Monroe, Reed," Brant called out, rushing to the cells, his heart pounding with the intensity of their return. The captives raised their heads, and in that moment recognition sparked a flicker of hope. "Brant, is that you?" Monroe's voice cracked, relief washing over him despite the scars of captivity. "Stand back," Brant shouted, wielding his sword to pick the lock. It clicked open, and he swung the door wide, setting the officers free with frantic urgency. The reunion was overwhelming, but before any joy could settle, the sounds of chaos continued to rage outside. "We must move quickly, there may be more guards," Brant urged, ushering Monroe and Reed to follow his lead. As they navigated the dim corridors, the fear of capture hung heavy in the air, an unwelcome specter threatening their escape. But determination burned brightly within the group as they pushed through the shadows, hearts pounding with each step. Suddenly, a barked order pierced the atmosphere as they approached a trapdoor into the lower levels. A handful of mercenaries awaited them, weapons drawn, eyes filled with lethal intent. Brant glanced at Monroe and Reed, there was no turning back. "We'll hold them off," Brant said, his voice steady even as adrenaline surged. "You two go on, we'll catch up." Monroe shook his head, resolve lit in his eyes. "No brother is left behind, we fight together." What followed was a flurry of movement, swords clashing against the cold steel of the mercenaries' blades. Side by side, the officers were a forceful emblem of unity, driven not only by purpose but by the very thread of loyalty that had woven them together before the darkness claimed them. Their skirmish, taut with desperation, danced on the edge of chaos, yet they fought with the truth of brotherhood propelling them. Each swing of the sword became a strike against fear, a reclaiming of strength lost. In the fray, Brant found a glimmer of hope. The escape route beckoned just beyond the crushing wave of darkness. "Push forward," he rallied his men, desperation giving his voice a compelling urgency. With a final surge, they broke free from the skirmish, propelling themselves towards the exit. Heart racing, brandishing his sword ahead, Brant pressed forward, a guardian determined to lead his brothers to safety. They charged down the final hall, the light of freedom beckoning them. At last, they burst through the exit into the open air. The night sky welcomed them with its vast embrace. Glancing back at the fortress, shadows loomed, but the cacophony of their struggle faded behind them. They sprinted towards the tree line, hoping to blend into the darkness surrounding them. As they reached the outskirts of the woods, panting and exhausted but free, the haunting memories of the tavern still clung to them. The scars of a battle fought and lives reclaimed hung heavily in the air. "We must regroup and alert the main forces," Brant commanded, his gaze unwavering. "This war isn't over, we must ensure that what has happened to us is never forgotten." Back in the safety of their encampment, an air of frenzy ensued as they recounted their tale. Officers listened with rapt attention as Brant narrated the horrors of their experience, the sinister dealings denounced by those who cowered in the darkness. When the dawn light broke, the truth emerged more vibrantly than before. The stories of Monroe and Reed, the treachery behind the tavern of the Old Quarter, and the networks of betrayal flowed through the ranks, revitalizing the troops with purpose. As the calls for justice became a collective roar, the ramifications of their venture would soon spread like wildfire. Actions were taken, no longer would the mercenaries operate with impunity. This was the turning of the tide, a ripple effect sparked by unity. Colonel Brant prepared for the arduous yet important journey ahead, rallying support from nearby camps and forging alliances with neighboring militias. Stories transformed into a tapestry of rebellion woven through hearts aflame with justice as the reality of their struggle fueled an awakening. Days turned to weeks again, transforming into a campaign forged in the fires of camaraderie. As battles raged, officers rallied to stand against betrayal, shadows of which once clung to their lives. The tale of the tavern shifted from fear to a clarion call for vigilance, spreading through the ranks. The danger of the past remained ever present, yet amid the throes of war, bonds strengthened, an unbreakable alliance built on loyalty and brotherhood. They fought not just for the end of a conflict but for every soldier lost and haunted by shadows. And as soldiers prepared for the road ahead, Colonel Brant gazed into the distance, resolute in their mission. The tavern of the Old Quarter would forever remain a haunting reminder, one he would ensure would never fade from memory. They would fight together until the very end for the sake of every soldier, every life entwined in their battle. Behind their smiles, history demanded acknowledgement, a lingering reminder that from shadows we emerge into the light, galvanized by the courage that binds us all. As the weeks progressed into a tide of relentless skirmishes and strategic gains, the story of the Tavern of the Old Quarter evolved. What had once been a mere backdrop to the tragic disappearance of Monroe and Reed transformed into a rallying cry that echoed through the encampments of tired soldiers. News of betrayal combined with the resolve to seek justice revived their spirits. In the heart of their growing coalition, Colonel Brant now found himself addressing an assembly of officers, their eyes glinting with determination. "We are not merely soldiers, we are stewards of honor," he declared, his voice steady. "The fight is not just against our tangible enemies but against everyone who seeks to exploit chaos for their own gain. Our brothers deserve retribution, but more importantly, we owe it to the innocent to ensure such treachery never reemerges." The response was electric. Veterans and fresh recruits nodded in agreement, their hearts united in a fervent desire for justice. They recognized the weight of their struggle, their collective narrative blending into something larger than the battles in which they fought. It was a fight for integrity and the very essence of humanity. The coalition organized a plan to root out remaining cells of mercenaries who operated under the cover of darkness, sowing distrust among regiments and towns alike. They combed through the landscape, targeting forts that served as strongholds for those who thrived on deception. Each operation became a carefully choreographed dance, one that required not just brute strength but cunning and strategy. During one such raid on a suspected mercenary camp, the tension reached its peak. The officers pressed forward under the cloak of night, hearts thumping in unison as they approached a compound nestled within dense foliage. Flags hung limply in the warm air, whispering secrets through the rustle of leaves. "We move quietly," Brant instructed, scanning the area. "We can leverage the darkness to our advantage, there's no room for mistakes." The men scattered into the shadows, forming evaluative positions. The knights had become their allies and stealth had turned into a vital weapon against those who had threatened their way of life. With posture honed through resolve and practice, they advanced. Suddenly, a shout rang through the air, a tension-breaking alarm that reverberated like a gunshot. An officer stumbled upon a sentry, and chaos ignited as alarm bells fractured the night. Under the oppressive weight of uncertainty, the men regrouped swiftly, understanding that in such scenarios everything relied on their ability to adapt. Battles erupted as the camp transformed into a crucible of violence. The officers fought valiantly, muscle and resolve intertwining in a desperate dance of freedom against subjugation. With his eyes on the prize, Brant drove through the fray, an unwavering beacon of strength navigating the chaos. It was here that they stumbled upon a cache of goods, maps detailing mercenary routes, plans of betrayal against their own horrors hidden beneath layers of deception. Brant's heart raced at the discovery. Securing this evidence would expose their enemies to the very core of their operations. As the tide of battle revealed itself in harsh clarity, the mercenaries began to falter, the balance tipping fiercely toward Brant and his coalition. Despite the wails of war, the ulterior motives of the mercenaries had begun to unravel. But amid the chaos, Brant recognized a familiar silhouette, a rogue mercenary whom they had captured previously, now commanding a group attempting to rally against the insurgents. The man stared defiantly, his eyes narrowing upon seeing Brant approach. "You think justice will prevail here?" he spat, venom lacing every word. "What you've seen is only the tip of the iceberg." Brant's sword met steel as they clashed, a violent symbol of the struggle between righteousness and malice. "Justice has already begun," Brant said, locking eyes with him, determination painted across his face. In that moment, as they fought, the energy elevated, pitting valor against cruelty. The struggle, furious and unyielding, felt both personal and universal, a representation of all that had been taken from them, all that had been demanded in the name of a twisted ideology. With a decisive swing, Brant parried the mercenary's blade and delivered a swift counter. Dark intentions turned mercilessly against their author. The fight ended with the rogue crumpling to the ground, and yet there remained an air of unresolved dread. The remaining mercenaries retreated, chaos giving way to the realization that their reign was unraveling. Brant signaled for a retreat of his own troops as dawn broke, pulling back into the quiet of the emerging sun, an ironic wash of hope after the night of terror. As the coalition gathered, breathing heavily from the scuffle, the discovery weighed heavily on the soldiers' hearts that day. Maps and plans were collected, evidence of much greater treachery looming just beyond the reaches of their immediate lines. They recognized this battle was but a chapter in a larger narrative that threatened their very existences. "The mercenaries operate on a far deeper level than we anticipated," Brant murmured to Monroe and Reed, who stood by his side. We've scratched the surface, but we need to dig deeper. That next morning, under the vibrant colors of dawn, their resolve solidified with the evidence they had gathered. They vowed to share their discoveries with officials beyond their immediate reach, transforming evidence into action, alliances into momentum. Each victory brought new energy, and within the weeks to follow, the coalition's resolve continued to grow into something formidable. They reached out to neighboring factions, cementing alliances, their narrative swelling against the tide of posturing betrayals that had previously eluded justice. Yet amidst their triumphs, shadows remained. The villains they sought to dismantle were still out there, lurking like phantoms in the corners of a war-torn landscape. With diligence, they prepared for what lay ahead, but transition brought a wealth of uncertainty. Rumors began pushing through the air, cultivated by successful raids. Whispers spoke of a larger force uniting against them, a mobilization determined to reverse their progress. Brant sensed the storm on the horizon, felt it dancing behind closed doors among the powerful. "Let this not deter us," he stated firmly to his men as they assembled once more. "They may band together, but they cannot extinguish the truth that drives us forward. We stand together, brothers, against the encroaching tide." As days passed, the coalition readied themselves for the inevitable confrontation. Tensions grew palpably thick as word of an impending strike reached them, a concerted effort to quash their insurgents. The knowledge felt heavy, yet it forged a desperate sense of purpose. Bran explored every angle, strategizing for the potential conflict ahead, all while keeping an eye on the maps that charted connections threading through the mercenaries they had confronted, searching for gaps to exploit. They were no longer simply battling scattered foes. They now understood the magnitude of the war ahead, fighting not just for their brothers but for the very soul of the nation clinging to its emerging identity. "The storm will break and we must be ready," Brant instructed. "We'll harness the strength of unity forged from every conflict faced. With every loss behind us, let it give rise to the courage needed for tomorrow." They prepared to stand resolute against the weight of shadows overshadowing their collective future, knowing that even as the threat loomed, a flicker of hope radiated from within. Together, they would carve their legacy into the annals of history, made real through loyalty, valor, and unwavering resolve. As dawn brushed the horizon once more, they readied themselves, hearts set against uncertainty, stern warriors in the face of chaos, believing in a world where shadows would ultimately yield to the light of justice. As dawn broke over the tense encampment, Colonel Brant gathered his officers for a final briefing. The air was electric with anticipation, each soldier acutely aware that they stood on the cusp of a decisive moment in their fight against the mercenaries who had cast a dark veil over their lives. This was not merely a confrontation, it was an opportunity to reclaim their honor and secure their future. "Today, we stand together against an oppressive force," Brant began, his gaze sweeping over the determined faces of his men. "We know the enemy now. We've seen their avarice and their willingness to betray even their own. They will not yield easily, but we fight not just for ourselves, but for every soldier who has fallen, for every life these mercenaries have shattered." A roar of agreement surged through the ranks, hearts beating in unison. It became clearer with each passing moment that they were a collective force, stronger together. The prior battles, filled with loss and hardship, had infused them with a newfound resilience, a bond forged in flames that could not easily be unraveled. "Today is our reckoning," Brant declared, his voice steady as stone. "Prepare yourselves, we move out at first light." They assembled their resources. Weapons were sharpened, ammunition checked, and strategies solidified. With the maps marking mercenary holdings, they planned an attack that would strike deep into the heart of their enemy's operations. Brant had identified key positions, an armory and a command post that could be infiltrated to disrupt the mercenary hierarchy. As the sun crept higher, illuminating their path, the coalition of officers navigated the woods, each step synchronized with purpose. They moved silently through the underbrush, a well-honed unit aware of their surroundings. Each snap of a twig or rustle of leaves felt amplified, the stillness before the storm loomed ever closer. In the distance, the horizon revealed the mercenary camp, tents sprawled haphazardly across the terrain, a stark contrast to the diligent order of the officers. The sound of laughter, music, and the clanging of metal filled the air, weaving an atmosphere of false security into their ranks. Brant's heart thudded in anticipation. He signaled for his men to take cover, assessing the situation carefully. "We have the advantage of surprise, let's ensure we use it wisely," he whispered. The officers spread out like shadows, laying low as they observed the mercenary camp. They were looking for any weakness, any opportunity to sow chaos among their foes. Minutes stretched into a tense silence as they focused on the movements of the guards patrolling the perimeter. "Now let's create a distraction," Brant instructed, eyes narrowing. He pointed towards a stack of supply crates nearby, covered in burlap. With well-practiced silence, a couple of men moved towards the crates, preparing to ignite them. Straw and other flammable materials were stuffed within, a crude mix of improvised explosives. As flames began to lick at the crates, the mercenaries were drawn towards the fire, their laughter evaporating as panic surged. The distraction ignited chaos within their camp, a perfect opening for Brant and his men to infiltrate. "Now move," Brant commanded, sprinting towards the nearest tent, sword raised. The officers followed, navigating through the tumultuous scene as fire erupted into chaos around them. The element of surprise reigned as they struck, taking advantage of mercenaries caught off guard. Brant and his men surged through the camp, swords clashing against steel, shouts mingling with the crackle of flames and the haunting sound of battle. In that fray, Brant locked eyes with a mercenary, recognizing the malevolence shining in his gaze. The fight was swift, the anticipation sharpened into resolve, the emptiness of the tavern haunting them as they fought with the shared memory of their lost brothers fueling their every swing. In the chaos, they pushed into the heart of the camp, an oppressive structure that served as the command post. Brant could see the flickering light inside, men scrambling amidst the confusion, trying to regroup and remold the chaos into something manageable. Yet there was a fear in their movements, an uncertainty that heightened in Brant's chest. "Secure the command post," Brant shouted, driving forward with relentless purpose. The command post was pivotal. It would scatter their enemies' cries for reinforcements, create a fracture within their ranks. Brant led the charge inside, a tide of soldiers flowing behind him. Within the command post, the mood shifted exponentially. Confusion reigned and mercenaries scrambled to gather arms, but the officers fought fiercely, securing every inch of ground as they pushed deeper into the room. Brant maneuvered with precision, clearing a path towards the center of the chaos. He caught sight of a table strewn with maps and dispatches, the very symbols of their enemy's treachery laid bare before him. Drafts detailing plans for future assaults and mercenary movements in other regions. The knowledge was substantial, a treasure trove of information. "Gather the intelligence," Brant commanded as chaos erupted around him. Officers quickly began scooping the documents, tucking them securely within their packs. But as they gathered their gains, the mercenaries rallied, emerging from their stupor with tenacity. Brant could sense the tide of battle shifting as reinforcements began to pour into the building, flooding the small space and threatening to overwhelm his men. Fall back," he shouted, knowing that staying longer would result in disaster. They had to retreat with the valuable intelligence gained. Brant led his team out, cutting his way through the thickening wall of mercenaries, retreating just as quickly as they had advanced. Outside, chaos persisted, but the flames had begun to consume the camp, a blazing monument to their confrontation. Brant turned to his men. "To the trees, we'll regroup there and plan our next steps." In the flurry of movement, they rallied their forces, dragging wounded comrades swiftly and pulling together as best they could. An escape route already formed in their minds, fortified by the knowledge they had secured. As they created some distance from the engulfing chaos, breaths came quickly and heavily, hearts sinking in the aftermath of their bold confrontation. Their bond deepened through shared experience, forged anew in battle. Brant reflected on their progress, heavily weighed by the discovery they had unearthed. "We have fought valiantly today," he spoke softly to his weary men. "But this is not an end. We'll build upon our victories, we will refine our strategies, our mission doesn't end here." Within the dusk of the dying sun, they strategized anew, infusing the aching void left by the ambush with purpose. Brant kept the gathered intelligence close, a beacon guiding their resolve forward. They contemplated next steps, readying themselves for the inevitable path ahead, fully understanding that the remnants of their battle against betrayal were far from over. As the stars glimmered to life, Brant penned a letter to the commanding officers detailing their findings, promising that the fight would not wane. Together, through thick and thin, they would persist as guardians of justice. The tale of the tavern of the old quarter would echo, transforming into a saga of defiance, a testament that shadows would never extinguish their flames. The horizon glimmered ahead, full of hope, reminding them that they were not merely soldiers. They were a family bound by loyalty, resilience, and the shared will to emerge from the dark, even as they walked bravely into the dawn of an uncertain future. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting the encampment in twilight, Colonel Brant felt a renewed sense of purpose coalesce within him. The evidence they had recovered would serve as a cornerstone for their next move, illuminating the hidden web of betrayal that had plagued their campaign. With a firm resolve, he gathered his officers in a semicircle around the dim flicker of a campfire. "Tonight, we strategize," Brant said, his voice cutting through the quiet crackle of burning wood. "We know now that our adversary stretches far beyond scattered mercenaries. It is a network of betrayal that threatens our very livelihoods. These plans outline their intentions to ensnare more than just soldiers. They aim to exploit our entire operation." He held up the maps, their edges singed from the fire they had fended off earlier. The officers leaned closer, eyes focused on the details that lay before them, routes, targets, ambitions that were now laid bare. "We must devise a counter-strategy that not only addresses the immediate threat but disrupts their entire operation." Murmuted nods of agreement surged through the group, their unity fortified by the heat of the fire and the urgency of their mission. As they dissected the plans, a young officer named Elias, fresh but eager, raised a question that seemed to echo the thoughts of many. "Should we not consider taking the fight directly to their leaders? If we can dismantle their command structure, remain unpredictable in our maneuvers, surely we can level the playing field." The suggestion hung in the air, electrifying. Brant considered it, nodding thoughtfully. "You're right, Elias, striking at the heart can shatter the body." He turned back to the others. "We need to extract the names of their leaders and create a decisive plan for disruption, ambushes, misinformation, anything that keeps them off balance." In the glow of the campfire, ideas blossomed like wildflowers emerging through cracks in stone. Plans were drawn, incorporating dual attacks that would allow them to strike multiple targets at once, thereby spreading the mercenaries thin. Brant could feel the pulse of camaraderie swell among them, their collective focus unifying as they strategized in the depths of twilight. Just as the meeting began to coalesce into a coherent plan, a sentry burst into the clearing, breathless and wide-eyed. "Colonel, we have guests approaching from the north." Brant immediately stiffened, his instincts heightening. "Are they friend or foe?" he asked sharply, glancing at the gathering of soldiers. "They wear no colors, sir, they're just men on horseback," the sentry replied, both fear and confusion plastered across his face. "Prepare for a potential ambush," Brant commanded, signaling for men to take their positions quietly, eyes scanning the horizon where shadows began to dance. Moments felt like hours as tension wrapped around them like a thick fog. Soon, figures emerged, cantering closer, silhouettes against the fading light revealing their shapes, with one figure riding at the forefront, a tall and imposing man. As they drew near, Brant's heart raced, caught between the anticipation of confrontation and the need for diplomacy. The leading figure raised a hand, signaling for his men to halt. "Colonel Brant," the man called out, voice carrying authority yet resonating with an edge of weariness. He dismounted, striding toward the group with purpose. "Who are you?" Brant demanded, eyeing the man and assessing potential threats. "I am Captain Arthur Gates from the Southern Regiment. We've been following news of your exploits against the mercenaries. We came to offer support." Relief washed over Brant momentarily, but caution reigned supreme. "Support in what way? We need men who know the terrain, who can integrate with our operations." "Exactly that," Gates replied, glancing at the officers who stood watch, their weapons still drawn. "The tide is turning and the forces against the mercenaries aim to unite. We need arrangements to ensure success. Together, we may just level the playing field permanently." Brant motioned for his men to lower their arms, sensing that they would have to trust this stranger if only for the moment. "Very well then, let's speak inside our encampment. There's much to discuss." They shifted back to the warmth of the campfire, Gates standing at the forefront commanding attention as he shared news of unrest brewing within the ranks of mercenaries. Whispers of dissent have surfaced among them. Discontent is rising not just in your region but throughout others. Fractions fight for power while others scramble to assert control. We can exploit that vulnerability." The coalition absorbed his words, hopes rekindling. Brant nodded thoughtfully, appreciating the newfound potential for collaboration. Tactics would forge a path forward. Alongside unified forces, they could mount an assault more formidable than ever before. As they strategized late into the night laced with newfound certainty, Brant felt the winds of change shift. Their cause was not isolated, it thrummed like a living network, intertwining with others dedicated to expose the rot within. Over the next few days, the regiment fortified their preparation, melding their plans with those of Gates's men. Training sessions flourished, pooling knowledge between the forces, and trust began to solidify like iron forged in flames. On the eve of their decisive strike against mercenary strongholds, the encampment thrummed with a renewed energy. Each officer moved with purpose, hearts beating synchronously with solidarity, every weapon sharpened with intent, every strategy deliberate and potent. Brant gathered his officers once more, standing before them with the vibrant colors of camaraderie painting the scene. "Tomorrow, we strike not just as separate units but as a coalition, one that embodies the spirit of freedom against oppression. We reclaim not just our fallen brothers but ensure the future we fight for is built upon integrity." In the hours approaching dawn, every soul in the encampment prepared for battle. The quiet of the night slowly fell away, giving way to the soft light of day, illuminating a battlefield ripe for reclaiming. As the sun began to rise, casting golden rays across the horizon, the forces assembled, unwavering in determination. Each individual stood as a testament to resilience under fire, their hearts as steady as the ground they fought for. In that moment, Brant felt the weight of anticipation pressing upon him, understanding that the means of justice would finally unveil itself. "Onward," he commanded, leading his men into the dawn, ready to meet their fate head-on, determined to dismantle the mercenary stronghold once and for all. Together, they would rise as guardians against the encroaching darkness. Shadows would not hold dominion over them. With the rising sun illuminating their path, they ventured forth, a tide of resolve washing away the remnants of fear, illuminating a journey not just of recuperation but of reclamation, and at long last freedom would ring true. As Colonel Brant and his united forces marched towards the mercenary stronghold, the air crackled with anticipation. Each soldier felt the weight of their mission, their hearts beating in rhythm with the goal laid ahead. The sun crested the horizon, casting a golden light upon their path, imbued with the promise of a new dawn. They approached the stronghold, an imposing structure fortified by shadows and arrogance. Guards paraded the walls, oblivious to the storm gathering at their gates. Brant exchanged knowing glances with Captain Gates. The time for subterfuge had passed. It was time to unleash the full force of their combined might. "Remember our purpose," Brant reminded his men, his voice steady. "We fight not just for revenge but for the honor of those we've lost, and for every soul ensnared in this web of treachery, we will reclaim what is ours." A deafening cheer erupted from the ranks, a fierce acknowledgement of their shared mission. With a guttural roar, they surged forward, the sound echoing like thunder through the morning air. As they launched their assault, chaos reigned. Brant led the way, expertly cutting through the sentinels who had once embodied fear and deception. The mercenaries, blind to the united force barreling towards them, faltered. Brant and his men moved with precision, honed by countless battles, training not only their bodies but their spirit. Gates rallied his men to flank the command post, where the heart of the mercenaries' operations lay. The two groups separated and overwhelmed their adversaries, swiftly capitalizing on the confusion that spread like wildfire. By exploiting the very weaknesses the mercenaries had themselves laid bare, Brant's coalition sparked hope amid a landscape brimming with violence. Inside the stronghold, the air became thick with the smoke of battle. Brant pressed onward, splitting factions of the enemy and reclaiming the territory that had long felt lost. Familiar faces rose amidst the fray, comrades fighting beside him, a chorus of unity ringing through their ranks. With every strike, with every advance, the notion of reclamation grew ever stronger. They moved through rooms teeming with maps, supplies, and unyielding adversaries. Brant pushed through to the command center where the last remnants of the mercenaries had gathered in desperate defense. When they erupted through the door, anticipation turned palpable. A few mercenary leaders cowered at the sight of the determined coalition. Brant felt a surge, a resolve fortified by losses endured and battles fought. "You've destroyed enough lives and futures," he declared, eyes ablaze. "What's done is done," one leader hissed, attempting to reclaim some semblance of power. "You think you can just erase us?" "Consider this your reckoning," Brant replied with unwavering clarity. With a swift movement, they engaged in battle once more, a fierce confrontation culminating in the culmination of hope and despair. The fight grew intense, chaotic yet almost sacred. The struggle echoed the very principles for which they stood. Brant felt the presence of all those who hadn't lived to see this moment. Their spirits invigorated his resolve. With each strike, they reclaimed history. In a final push, Brant seized the moment as the last remnants of mercenary resistance faltered. His sword found its target, securing victory against those whose greed had eclipsed humanity. Silence fell, heavy but liberating. It was a finality felt deep within. As the dust settled and the sun reached its zenith, the realization began to dawn upon them: the tides of the past no longer dictated their future. They had risen to reclaim that future, embracing the scars of their journeys as marks of honor. The coalition stood battered yet unbroken, triumphant in their goal. They gathered together, breaths steadying as they surveyed the remnants of their adversaries. Gone was the fear that had trailed them through shadows. They were united in victory, an embodiment of resilience pushing through the dark. Brant's voice rose amidst the silence, fervent and proud. "We stood together against the tide of despair. Today we reclaim not just our fallen brothers but our very identities. Let this be a dawn of unity, a celebration of freedom." Cheers erupted as soldiers embraced, a communion of triumph washing over them, washing away the stains of betrayal. New friendships had been forged in the fires of battle, and they would carry these bonds onward, a living testament to victory and sacrifice. Though the path to healing would be long, they understood that the sun would rise higher over the horizon, representing hope, resilience, and possibility. They had written their own story, one intertwined with loyalty, and as they returned to their encampments, the warmth of unity filled the air. The past had shaped them, but the future was theirs to mold. The lessons learned would resonate through every story shared, each turn in the road a reminder that shadows could only thrive in silence. With vigilance, they could ensure that justice prevailed. In that warm, tangible moment of unity, Brant gazed around at the faces of his brothers and knew they would never walk this path of struggle alone again. Together, they had emerged from the darkness, stepping into the light, fortified against any foe that might dare encroach upon their newfound strength. The journey was far from over, but the resolve would guide them. They had weathered storms and emerged victorious, and as they looked forward, they understood something deeply profound. Their spirits were indomitable, an unyielding flame against the relentless shadows. The echoes of battle would fade, but the bonds would remain eternal, a steadfast reminder that together they could rise against any darkness, creating a world where hope and justice reign unchallenged, where light unfailingly breaks through the shadows.